We're closing the building. Tonight.
You close it, people freeze in their last goodbyes.
Stop.
Not today. Then you take responsibility, ma'am.
I will. Put it on me.
Elena, don't!
I'm asking you. Not as a memory. As a person.
I fix wires, not miracles.
Decision. Yes or no?
72 hours, that's it.
Done. Please, don't leave again.
You can't park that truck here. This is a fire lane. Cal Bennett didn't look up from the clipboard. He was scanning. He dealt with city inspectors for 37 years. They came in two varieties, the ones who wanted coffee and a handshake, and the ones who wanted a fight before breakfast. This one, with his reflective vest and clipboard of his own, clearly belonged to the second category. It's a loading dock, Cal said, still reading. That's what loading docks are for. Loading. The sign says, I can read the sign. I installed the sign. In 1994, Cal finally raised his eyes. The inspector was maybe 30, with the kind of mustache that suggested he'd grown. It's specifically to look older. It wasn't working. You want to write me up? Go ahead. But that's county signage on a city-inspected facility, so you'll need to figure out whose form to use. Should take about 6 weeks. The inspector's face reddened. He opened his mouth to respond. No, he's not leaving. We need him. The voice came from behind Cal, female, certain, familiar in a way that made the hair on his arms stand up before his brain could catch up. He turned. Elena Ruiz stood in the loading bay doorway, silhouetted against the fluorescent glow of the hospice hallway. She wore a gray cardigan over a blue blouse, reading glasses pushed up into silver-streaked dark hair. A lanyard hung around her neck with an ID badge he couldn't quite make out. 10 years. 10 years since she'd walked out of the Italian restaurant on 4th Street, leaving him with a velvet box and a question she'd refused to answer. Ms. Ruiz. The inspector's tone shifted, deferential now. I was just explaining to this contractor. I heard what you were explaining. Elena stepped down onto the concrete. She moved past Cal without looking at him, close enough that he caught a trace of something citrus. Mr. Bennett's truck will be here for the next 72 hours. If that creates a paperwork problem for you, I'll be happy to discuss it with your supervisor. Or you can note it and move on to whatever you actually came here to inspect. The inspector glanced between them. Whatever he saw made him decide this wasn't his hill to die on. He scribbled something on his clipboard and retreated toward the side, lot, without another word. Cal watched him go. The silence stretched. I didn't ask for your help, he said finally. I know. Elena was facing the parking lot now, arms crossed. But you were about to get yourself banned from the premises, and I can't afford to find another electrician who'll work for what we're paying. So this is about money. She turned. Her eyes were the same deep brown he remembered, but the skin around them had softened, creased at the corners. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. Everything is about money, Cal. You've been a contractor long enough to know that. He wanted to say something cutting, wanted to mention that she'd never returned the spare key to his apartment, or that he'd kept their answering machine tape for 3 years before finally throwing it out. Wanted to ask why she'd called his union office specifically knowing full well whose name would come up first on the emergency roster. Instead, he said, "Your wiring's shot. The whole East Wing needs to be redone. You're looking at 40 hours minimum, and that's if I don't find any surprises in the walls." "We don't have 40 hours. Elena uncrossed her arms. "We have 72. The state inspector comes Thursday morning. If we fail, we lose our license. If we lose our license, we lose our funding. And if we lose our funding, you close. We close." She said it flatly, like a diagnosis. 12 families are counting on us to get them through the worst weeks of their lives. 12 people who chose to die here, Cal, because they thought it would be gentler than a hospital. And I'm the one who has to look at their children and say we tried. Cal looked down at his clipboard. The estimate he'd scrawled that morning stared back at him. Materials, labor, the contingency buffer. He always added for old buildings with old secrets buried in their bones. "This isn't my problem," he said. "No, it's mine." Elena's voice didn't waver. "But you're the only contractor in this city who returned my call. The only one who didn't hang up when I told them the timeline and the budget. So either you're desperate or you're stubborn, or you still care about something besides grudges. I'm hoping it's the third one." He could walk away. He should walk away. Every smart instinct he had was screaming at him to get back in his truck and drive until he hit a county line. But the building behind her was old brick and good bones, the kind of place they didn't make anymore. And somewhere inside, 12 families were sitting with people they loved, counting down hours they couldn't get back. Cal rubbed the back of his neck. His wedding ring, the one he'd never worn, the one that sat in his wallet creating a permanent dent in the leather, seemed to press against his hip. 72 hours, he said, not a minute more. And I picked my own crew. Something flickered across Elena's face. Relief, maybe, or the ghost of something older. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." He picked up his toolbox and started toward the loading bay door. "You haven't seen the estimate." He was halfway through the doorway when she spoke again. "Cal." He stopped but didn't turn around. Anger was easier than grief. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago. "I'm glad it was you," she said quietly. "Who answered the call?" He didn't respond. He walked into the building, into the smell of lemon cleaner and coffee, past a bulletin board covered with photos of families and hand-drawn cards from grandchildren, and tried to convince himself that the tightness in his chest was just the dust. 3 hours later, he was elbow-deep in a junction box when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Donor meeting confirmed for Thursday a.m. They want both of us to host the open house. If building passes inspection. Cal stared at the screen. The junction box sparked once, twice, and went dark. In the hallway, a family was singing happy birthday to someone who wouldn't see another one. And somewhere in the East Wing, Elena Ruiz was asking him to stand beside her one more time in front of strangers, pretending that the last decade hadn't carved a canyon between them. He should have said no. He picked up his wire strippers and got back to work. The pipe burst At 9:47 p.m., Cal heard it before he saw it, a groan from somewhere deep in the walls, then a wet crack that echoed through the east wing like a gunshot. By the time he rounded the corner, water was already pooling across the hallway floor, spreading toward a stack of cardboard boxes labeled donor files 2019 to 2024. No, no, no. Elena came running from the opposite direction, her flats slapping against the wet linoleum. She dropped to her knees beside the boxes, trying to lift them, but the bottoms were already soaked through, paper darkened and curled at the edges. Cal was already past her, flashlight clenched between his teeth, hands searching the wall for the shut-off valve he'd mapped that afternoon. The water was ankle-deep now and shockingly cold. Shut-offs behind the panel. He set around the flashlight. I need something flat. Screwdriver. Butter knife. Anything. I don't have. Elena looked around wildly. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow that made the flooding hallway look like the scene of something terrible. My glasses, she said suddenly. She pulled them from her hair, folded them, and pressed the flat edge of the arm into his palm. Cal jammed it into the panel seam and twisted. The cover popped free. Inside, a rusted valve wheel sat surrounded by decades of mineral buildup. He grabbed it and pulled. Nothing. He braced his foot against the wall and pulled harder, feeling something in his shoulder protest. The wheel screamed and turned. The water slowed to a trickle, then stopped. They stood in the darkness, breathing hard. Somewhere down the hall, a patient's call button was chiming, soft, insistent, unanswered. Cal could hear footsteps, voices, a nurse calling out that everything was fine, just a little plumbing issue, nothing to worry about. The boxes, Elena said. Her voice was flat. Cal shone his flashlight at the stack. 3 of the 5 were ruined, their contents bleeding ink onto the floor. Elena was already pulling folders out, trying to separate the salvageable from the lost. Grant applications. She said more to herself than to him. 3 years of donor correspondence. The Metzger pledge documentation. She stopped, held up a folder that dripped steadily onto her shoes. This was the only copy. You didn't have backups? We had backups. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. On the server, which was in the basement, which flooded 6 months ago, she dropped the folder onto the pile. We've been running on paper and prayers ever since. Cal looked at the ruined boxes, the dark hallway, the woman kneeling in 3 inches of water trying to save paperwork that was already gone. 10 years ago, he would have knelt beside her, would have told her they'd figure it out together, would have believed it. Instead, he said, "We need to get this water out before it damages the subfloor. You have a wet vac." Elena looked up at him. In the red emergency light, her face was all shadows and hard angles. Maintenance closet, end of the hall. She stood, water dripping from the hem of her slacks. "I'll get it. I'll get it. You call your insurance company. At 10 o'clock at night, leave a message. Document everything. Take pictures with your phone before we clean up. He was already walking. And find somewhere dry for whatever's left of those files. He heard her pull out her phone, heard the artificial click of a camera shutter over and over as he disappeared around the corner. The maintenance closet was locked. Of course it was. Cal pulled out his picks, old habit, older skill, and had it open in 30 seconds. The wet vac was ancient but functional, a relic from the same era as the building itself. When he got back, Elena was sitting on a dry patch of floor with her back against the wall, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to someone's voicemail, her voice steady and professional, but her free hand was shaking. Cal plugged in the wet vac and got to work. It took 2 hours to clear the water. By midnight, the floor was damp but passable. The ruined boxes had been hauled to the dumpster, and the salvage files were spread across a conference room table, drying under a rotating fan Elena had found in someone's office. Cal sat on the edge of the table, drinking burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup. His shoulders ached. His knees ached worse. 62 years old and crawling around on wet floors like he was still an apprentice. Elena stood at the window, staring out at the parking lot. The emergency lights had been replaced by the soft glow of a desk lamp, and she looked less like a director now than like someone who'd been caught in a storm without an umbrella. The Metzger pledge, she said without turning around. That was $200,000, enough to keep us open another 18 months. Can you get them to send another copy? I can try, but Harold Metzger is 86 years old and convinced that email is a government surveillance program. His lawyer retired last year. His son lives in Singapore and hasn't spoken to him since 2019. She rubbed her eyes. It took me 8 months to get him to sign the original. Cal set down his coffee cup. Why do they want both of us? What? The donors. The open house. Your text said they want both of us to host it. Why? Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she finally turned, her expression was difficult to read. Because Harold Metzger asked about you. Cal felt something cold settle in his stomach. He doesn't know me. He knew your father. Elena walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from him. Frank Bennett, union electrician, worked on the original renovation of this building in 1987. I know when my father worked here. Then, he did it for free. Donated 6 weeks of labor because his mother died in this hospice and he wanted to give something back. Elena's eyes didn't leave his face. Harold Metzger was on the board then. He remembers. When I told him we needed emergency electrical work, he asked if Frank's son was still in the business. When I said yes, he said he'd double his pledge if you were the one who did the job. Cal's jaw tightened. You didn't mention this when you called. Would you have come if I had? He didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Harold wants to meet you, Elena continued. At the open house. He wants to shake the hand of Frank Bennett's son and know that his money is going to a place that still means something. She paused. And he wants to see us working together. Why? Because I told him we were old friends, that we'd known each other for years. She looked down at her hands. I didn't tell him which years. The conference room felt smaller suddenly. The hum of the fan was too loud. Cal could smell the dampness in the air, the old paper, the coffee going cold between them. So, I'm a prop, he said. You're the reason we might still have a chance. Elena looked up. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Cal. I'm not asking you to pretend the last 10 years didn't happen. I'm asking you to stand in a room for 2 hours on Thursday and let an old man believe that some things last. Some things don't. No, her voice was soft. They don't. The fan rotated. Papers rustled. Somewhere in the building, a night nurse was making rounds, checking on patients who would never leave. Cal stood up. His knees cracked. I need to check the electrical panel, he said. Make sure the surge didn't fry anything else. He was at the door when Elena spoke again. Cal. He stopped. His hand was on the frame. I found something today, in the storage room off the east wing. Her voice was strange now, careful, almost fragile. There's a donation plaque on the wall. From 1987. Frank Bennett's name is on it. I know. I've seen it. There's another name, too, below his. Cal didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Elena Ruiz, she said, volunteer coordinator, 1986 to 1991. A pause. I was 20 years old. I didn't know your father was working here until the dedication ceremony. I didn't know he had a son at all. What's your point? My point is that I've been part of this place longer than I've been part of anything else in my life. Longer than my marriage. Longer than my career. Longer than... She stopped. I never really left Cal, even when I thought I had. He stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, and felt the weight of something he couldn't name pressing against his chest. Get some sleep, he said finally. Tomorrow's going to be harder. He walked out into the dark hallway, past the water stains on the walls, past the bulletin board with its photos and cards, past all the accumulated evidence of lives being measured in days instead of years. And he tried not to think about a storage room plaque, 2 names carved into brass, and the strange mathematics of a fate that had circled them both for 40 years before finally closing the loop. The morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made everything feel unfinished. Cal had slept 3 hours on a cot in the break room, his jacket balled up under his head, and woke to the sound of someone arguing in the hallway. I don't care what the schedule says. We need those panels today, not Friday. He recognized Elena's voice before he was fully conscious. She was on her phone, pacing past the break room door, her shadow cutting across the floor in sharp, agitated lines. Then find another supplier. Call Pittsburgh. Call Cleveland. I don't care if you have to drive there yourself. A pause. Fine. Just get it done. Cal sat up, rubbed his face, and checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. 49 hours left. By the time he'd splashed water on his face and found coffee that wasn't completely terrible, the hospice had transformed into something between a construction site and a controlled emergency. 2 of his crew members, Danny Kowalczyk and Maria Santos, both union, both reliable, had arrived at 6 and were already pulling wire through the East Wing ceiling. Volunteers in matching t-shirts hauled furniture out of patient rooms so the floors could be checked for water damage. A nurse named Charlene had commandeered the front desk and was fielding calls with the calm efficiency of an air traffic controller. And in the middle of all of it, Elena moved like a conductor with an orchestra on fire. Cal watched her from across the lobby. She was talking to 3 people at once, a contractor, a volunteer coordinator, someone in a suit who kept checking his watch, and somehow managing to make each of them feel like they had her full attention. Her cardigan was gone, replaced by a worn flannel shirt that looked like it belonged to someone else. Her hair was pulled back in a knot that was already coming loose. She caught him looking. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her phone rang, and she turned away, and the moment dissolved like smoke. "Boss!" Danny appeared at Cal's elbow, a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. He was 54, built like a refrigerator, and had worked with Cal for 23 years. He also had a talent for stating the obvious at exactly the wrong time. "This place is a mess." "I know." "The junction boxes in the East Wing are original, like 1960s original. I'm surprised they haven't burned the building down already." "I know. And that director lady keeps asking me questions I don't have answers to, like how long things are going to take and whether we're going to pass inspection." Danny scratched his jaw. She seemed stressed. Cal took a long sip of his coffee. "She's running a hospice that's about to lose its license." "I'd be stressed too." "Yeah, but she seems stressed about you specifically." Danny's eyes were a little too knowing. "She keeps looking over here when she thinks no one's watching. And she asked Maria if you were married." "Danny, I'm just saying." "Don't." Danny held up his hands in surrender and wandered off to argue with a volunteer about where to put a ladder. Cal finished his coffee, crushed the cup, and went to find something useful to do. The morning passed in a blur of wire and drywall. Cal lost himself in the work the way he always had, hands busy, mind quiet, the familiar rhythm of problem and solution drowning out everything else. He replaced 3 junction boxes, rewired a bathroom that had been held together by electrical tape and optimism, and discovered a nest of mice living behind the East Wing breaker panel. The mice were relocated. The breaker panel was not as lucky. "We need a new one," he told Elena, finding her in the conference room surrounded by the still-drying paperwork from the flood. "The whole thing's corroded. I can patch it enough to pass inspection, but it'll fail again within 6 months." "How much?" $1,200 for the panel, another $800 for labor. Elena closed her eyes. Her pen tapped against the table in a rhythm that suggested she was doing math she didn't like. "Do it," she said finally. "I'll figure out where to find the money." "You don't have it." "I'll find it." She opened her eyes. "That's what I do, Cal. I find things that aren't there and make them appear. Money, time, hope, whatever people need to get through the next day." A tired smile crossed her face. "It's basically magic, except the magician never gets to sleep." He should have left it there, should have nodded and gone back to work and kept the wall between them solid and high. Instead, he sat down across from her. "When's the last time you ate something?" She blinked, thrown by the question. "I had coffee." "That's not food." "It's close enough." "It's not." Cal leaned back in his chair. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here. Manny's. They do breakfast all day. Decent eggs, better hash browns." "I know Manny's. I've been eating there since before you knew this city existed. Then you know they deliver." He pulled out his phone. "What do you want?" Elena stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. "You're ordering me breakfast." "I'm ordering us breakfast. I haven't eaten either." He scrolled through his contacts. "Eggs? Pancakes? The biscuits are good, if you don't mind them a little dry." "Cal, pick something, or I'm getting you oatmeal." "I hate oatmeal." "I know." The words hung in the air between them. "I know." 2 syllables that carried the weight of shared mornings and arguments about breakfast and 100 small intimacies that neither of them had forgotten. Elena looked down at her papers. "Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and tell Manny to put hot sauce on the side, not on top." "I remember." He made the call. She pretended to work. And for a few minutes, the conference room felt almost peaceful. The food arrived at noon, delivered by Manny's grandson, a teenager with headphones who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Cal paid over Elena's protests, and they ate in the conference room with the door closed, papers pushed to one side, the sounds of construction muffled by distance. "The Metzger meeting," Elena said between bites of toast. "I should prepare you." "I don't need preparing." "Harold is old-fashioned. He's going to ask about your father. He's going to want to hear stories." She set down her fork. "And he's going to ask about us." "What did you tell him?" "That we were colleagues, old friends, that we'd lost touch for a while, but reconnected when I needed help with the renovation." "That's not entirely a lie. It's not entirely the truth either." Elena met his eyes. "He's sentimental, Cal. He believes in signs and fate and things happening for a reason. When I told him Frank Bennett's son was available, he took it as confirmation that this place was meant to survive. My father's been dead for 15 years. I know, but his name is still on that wall. And Harold remembers him showing up every day for 6 weeks, working for free because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "He thinks you're the same kind of man." Cal pushed his eggs around his plate. "What kind of man do you think I am?" The question surprised them both. Elena set down her coffee cup slowly, carefully, like it might shatter if she moved too fast. "I think you're the kind of man who keeps a ring in his wallet for 10 years, she said quietly. "Who answers a call from someone who hurt him because the work matters more than the grudge? Who orders breakfast for a woman he has every right to hate because he can't stand watching anyone go hungry?" She looked at him, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I think you're the kind of man your father would be proud of, and I think that terrifies you." Cal's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she didn't know him anymore, that 10 years had changed him into someone harder and colder and less capable of the kind of softness she was describing. But his hands were shaking, and his eggs were getting cold, and somewhere in the building, an elderly volunteer was loudly narrating the tension between two contractors to anyone who would listen. "That's Dolores," Elena said, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "She's 82, thinks she's a sports commentator. I can hear her. She's been providing color commentary on my love life since 2019. She was devastated when my divorce finalized. Said it ruined her prediction bracket." Cal almost laughed. "Almost. She has a prediction bracket. She has a prediction bracket, a rating system, and a newsletter she sends to the other volunteers." Elena shook her head. "Last month, she gave me a 3 out of 10 for romantic potential. Said I needed to, quote, stop dating men who look like accountants. I don't look like an accountant. No." Elena's smile faded into something more complicated. "You don't." The moment stretched, expanded, filled with all the things neither of them was willing to say. Then Cal's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Danny's name, followed by a message that made his stomach drop. "Found something weird in the East Wing storage room. You need to see this. I have to go." Cal stood, grateful for the escape. Danny found something. What kind of something? He didn't say. Cal was already at the door. "Finish your breakfast. I'll handle it." He walked out before she could respond, before the softness in her eyes could pull him any further into territory he'd sworn he'd never enter again. The storage room was at the far end of the East Wing, past patient rooms and supply closets, and a water fountain that hadn't worked since the Reagan administration. Danny was waiting outside, arms crossed, his expression troubled. "What is it?" "Behind the baseboard." Danny pointed at a section of wall where the molding had been pulled away. "I was checking for water damage and found a loose panel. There's a box back there." Cal crouched down and looked. Sure enough, a small metal box sat in the hollow space between the wall studs. It was rusted at the edges, covered in dust, and had something written on the top in faded black marker. He reached in and pulled it out. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, careful, with the slight leftward slant he'd recognize anywhere. His name, in Elena's handwriting, and below it, a date, June 14th, 2015. The night she'd said no, Cal sat back on his heels, the box heavy in his hands, and felt the past reach up through the floorboards to grab him by the throat. "Boss!" Danny's voice seemed far away. "You okay?" Cal didn't answer. He stood, tucked the box under his arm, and walked out of the storage room without a word. He needed air. He needed time. He needed to figure out why the woman who'd broken his heart had hidden a box with his name on it inside the walls of the place she'd never really left. And he needed to decide whether he was brave enough to open it. Cal didn't open the box. He carried it to his truck, locked it in the glove compartment, and went back to work like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. For 3 hours, he buried himself in wire and conduit, replacing outlets, testing circuits, doing the kind of mindless physical labor that left no room for questions he wasn't ready to answer. But the box sat in his truck like a heartbeat. He could feel it through the walls, through the parking lot, through every minute that passed without him looking at what was inside. At 4:15 p.m., his son arrived. Cal was up on a ladder in the East Wing corridor when he heard the commotion. A child's voice, high and sharp, followed by the lower murmur of adult conversation. He climbed down and followed the sound to the lobby where a scene was unfolding that made his chest tighten. Marcus Bennett stood near the front desk, his 5-year-old son, Cal's grandson, pressed against his leg. The boy's name was Isaiah, and he had his grandmother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw and a way of looking at the world like it was constantly too loud. Right now, the world was definitely too loud. Dad. Marcus spotted Cal, and relief flooded his face. I'm sorry. I tried to call, but you didn't answer. Mom had an emergency at work, and the daycare closed early because of a water main break. And I have a client meeting in 40 minutes that I can't reschedule. Slow down. Cal crossed the lobby, keeping his movements calm. Isaiah was doing the thing he did when everything became too much. Hands over his ears, eyes squeezed shut, small body vibrating with the effort of holding himself together. What do you need? 2 hours. Maybe 3. I just need someone to watch him. And you were the closest. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted in the particular way of young fathers who were trying to do everything and failing at most of it. I know this isn't a great place for him. There's a lot going on, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. Cal looked at his grandson. Isaiah was 7 months past his 5th birthday, recently diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, and possessed of a memory that could recall the exact location of every electrical outlet in Cal's apartment. He was also, at this particular moment, about 30 seconds away from a full meltdown. Isaiah. Cal crouched down, putting himself at eye level. Hey, buddy, can you look at me? The boy shook his head, hands still clamped over his ears. His breathing was getting faster. That's okay. You don't have to look, but I need you to listen. Cal kept his voice low, steady. We're going to find somewhere quiet. Just you and me. Okay? Too many people. Isaiah's voice was muffled. Too many sounds. The lights are buzzing. Cal glanced up at the fluorescent panels. He couldn't hear any buzzing, but that didn't mean anything. Isaiah heard things other people missed, frequencies and vibrations that lived below the threshold of normal perception. I know, buddy. I know. Let me just. Isaiah. The voice came from behind Cal, soft, careful, familiar. Elena had appeared from somewhere, her approach so quiet that Cal hadn't heard her coming. She stood a few feet away, hands at her sides, her posture deliberately non-threatening. Hi there, she said. My name is Elena. I run this place. She didn't move closer, didn't crouch down, just stood there, calm and still, like a tree waiting for a bird to decide whether to land. You're Cal's grandson, aren't you? He told me about you. Cal hadn't told her anything about Isaiah, but he understood what she was doing building a bridge, creating connection, giving the boy something to hold on to besides fear. Isaiah's hands lowered half an inch. Grandpa talked about me? He did. He said you're really smart, that you notice things other people don't notice. Elena's voice was unhurried, each word placed with precision. That sounds hard sometimes. Noticing everything. It's loud. Isaiah's eyes opened a crack. Everything is loud. I bet it is. Elena nodded slowly. You know what? There's a room down the hall that's very quiet. No buzzing lights. No people. Just a couch and some blankets and a fish tank. She paused. The fish don't make any noise at all. Would you like to see it? Isaiah looked at Cal. Cal looked at Elena. Something passed between them. A question, an answer, a trust that had no business existing after 10 years of silence. Cal nodded. Okay, Isaiah said quietly. I want to see the fish. Elena led the way. She walked slowly, matching her pace to the boy's short legs, keeping her distance, but staying close enough to feel like a guide rather than a stranger. Cal followed behind with Marcus, watching as his grandson gradually unclenched, his shoulders dropping, his breathing slowing, his hands finally falling all the way to his sides. The room was a small office that had been converted into something between a meditation space and a sensory refuge. The lights were off, replaced by the soft blue glow of a large aquarium built into one wall. A couch sat in the corner, draped with weighted blankets. The carpet was thick and soft, absorbing sound. Isaiah walked straight to the fish tank and pressed his nose against the glass. They're tetras, Elena said, settling into a chair near the door. The blue ones are called neons. The orange ones are called flames. They've been living here for 3 years, and they've never once complained about the noise outside, because they can't hear it. Isaiah's voice was steadier now, fascinated. Water blocks sound waves differently than air. The density is higher. Elena smiled. That's exactly right. Marcus touched Cal's arm. Dad, I really have to go. Are you sure? Go. Cal didn't take his eyes off his grandson. We'll be fine. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. He slipped out the door without saying goodbye, already pulling his phone from his pocket, already returning to the world of client meetings and responsibilities that couldn't wait. Cal stood in the doorway, uncertain what to do. He'd never been good at this. The waiting, the patience, the delicate work of helping a child feel safe. That had always been his wife's territory before the divorce, before she decided that his silences were too heavy and his absences too long and his love too much like a locked room she couldn't find the key to. You can sit down. Elena's voice was gentle. He's okay now. Cal lowered himself onto the couch. The weighted blanket was heavier than he expected, pressing against his legs like a warm hand. Where did you learn to do that? He asked quietly. Do what? Talk to him like that, like you knew exactly what he needed. Elena was quiet for a moment. On the other side of the room, Isaiah had found a small stool and was sitting in front of the tank, watching the fish with an intensity that bordered on meditation. I had a nephew, she said finally. Miguel, my sister's son. He was a lot like Isaiah, sensitive to sounds, overwhelmed by crowds, happiest when the world was small and quiet. She paused. He died when he was 12. Brain tumor. Diagnosed too late. Elena! He spent his last 3 weeks here. Her voice didn't waver, but Cal could hear the effort it took to keep it steady. In this hospice, in a room down the hall, and every day I would come and sit with him and watch the fish because it was the only thing that made him feel safe. She looked at the tank. I had this room built after he was gone for the other kids who come through here, the ones who need somewhere quiet to fall apart. Cal didn't know what to say. 10 years ago, he thought he'd known everything about her, her habits, her fears, her favorite foods, the way she laughed when she was truly happy. But this was a part of her life he'd never seen, a grief she carried alone. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know. You couldn't have known. I never told you." Elena finally looked at him. "There's a lot I never told you, Cal. Things I should have said. Reasons I should have explained." Her eyes went to Isaiah, still entranced by the fish. "I was afraid that if I let you all the way in, you'd see the broken parts and decide they were too much to fix. I'm an electrician. I fix broken things for a living. Not everything can be rewired." No, Cal's voice was rough, but some things can. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the aquarium filter. Isaiah had found a piece of paper somewhere and was drawing something, fish, probably, or maybe circuits, the two things that seemed to occupy most of his mental landscape. "He's going to be okay," Elena said softly. "Your grandson. He's going to find his way." "How do you know?" "Because he has you." She smiled, sad and certain. "And you don't give up on people, even when you should." Before Cal could respond, there was a knock at the door. Charlene, the nurse from the front desk, poked her head in. "Ms. Ruiz? The donor rep is here. Mr. Whitmore. He's asking about the open house setup, and he seems..." She hesitated. Agitated. Elena stood immediately, smoothing her shirt. "I'll handle it. Cal, can you?" "I've got him." Cal nodded toward Isaiah. "Go." She was almost out the door when Charlene added, "He's also asking about the water damage. Someone told him about the flood last night. He's talking about pulling the pledge if the building isn't up to code." Elena's face went pale. "Who told him?" "I don't know, but he's got photos." Cal watched Elena's shoulders tighten, watched her take a breath, and rebuild herself into the woman who could handle anything. She gave him one last look, grateful, worried, something else he couldn't name, and disappeared down the hallway. Charlene lingered. "Is there anything I can do?" "Yeah." Cal stood up. "Keep an eye on the boy for 5 minutes. I need to talk to someone." He found the donor rep in the lobby, a thin man in an expensive suit, holding a tablet with images of last night's flooding pulled up on the screen. He was speaking in a low, sharp voice to one of the volunteers, who looked like she wanted to crawl under the front desk and hide. Elena was already there, her hands clasped in front of her, her voice calm and professional even as the man gestured at his tablet with barely contained irritation. Completely unacceptable. If this is the condition of the facility, I can't recommend that our foundation continue its support. The liability alone. Mr. Whitmore. Elena's voice cut through his complaint like a blade through silk. The water damage has been addressed. The electrical systems are being upgraded as we speak, and the inspection is still 2 days away. But the photographs were taken during an active emergency response, before repairs began. Elena didn't flinch. If you'd like, I can show you the affected area now. You'll see that the situation is fully under control. Cal stepped forward. I'll vouch for that. The donor rep turned, his eyes narrowing. And you are Cal Bennett, lead contractor on the electrical renovation. Union certified, 40 years experience. Cal kept his voice steady, professional. The flooding last night was caused by a corroded pipe that we've already replaced. The water damage was contained to non-structural elements, and the building will pass inspection on Thursday because I don't take jobs I can't finish. Whitmore looked between them, the director with her calm certainty, the contractor with his quiet confidence. Something in his expression shifted. And the open house, the Metzger event, will proceed as planned. Elena didn't hesitate. Mr. Bennett and I will be hosting together as Mr. Metzger requested. The building will be ready. The families will be comfortable. And your foundation will see exactly the kind of facility it's investing in. The donor rep studied her for a long moment. Then he tucked his tablet under his arm. I'll need to see progress reports, daily, with photographs. You'll have them. And I'll be attending the open house personally to assess. We look forward to it. Whitmore nodded once, sharply, and walked out the front door without another word. The lobby seemed to exhale. Elena turned to Cal. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, she said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yeah. Cal's chest felt tight. I did. From down the hallway, he heard Isaiah's voice, high and happy. Grandpa, the orange fish are playing tag. And despite everything, the pressure, the deadline, the box still sitting in his truck with his name written in her handwriting, Cal felt something in his chest loosen. Just a little, just enough. Go back to your grandson. Elena said, I'll handle the paperwork. Cal nodded, but before he left, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the estimate for the new breaker panel. I talked to my supplier. He said, called in a favor. The panel's coming at cost, and I'm waiving the labor. Elena stared at the paper. Cal, you can't. Already done. He pressed it into her hand. Consider it a donation from Frank Bennett's son. He walked away before she could argue, before the gratitude in her eyes could undo the last of his defenses. But he heard her voice behind him, soft and wondering, your name, in my handwriting. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Cal waited until Isaiah was asleep. Marcus had picked the boy up at 7, full of apologies and promises to make it up to him. Isaiah had hugged Cal's leg and said, the fish were nice. Grandpa, can we come back? And Cal had said yes without thinking, without calculating what that promise might cost him. Now, it was almost midnight. The hospice was quiet, the day shift replaced by a skeleton crew of night nurses who moved through the hallways like ghosts. Elena had gone home hours ago, or so Cal assumed. He hadn't seen her since the confrontation with Whitmore. He sat in his truck in the empty parking lot, the metal box on his lap. His name stared up at him. Her handwriting. The date that had cleaved his life into before and after. June 14th, 2015. He remembered everything about that night. The restaurant with the red checkered tablecloths. The candle that kept flickering because the air conditioning was too strong. The weight of the ring box in his pocket, heavy as a stone, heavy as hope. He'd rehearsed the words for weeks, had written them down, crossed them out, rewritten them. In the end, he'd forgotten all of it, had just looked at her across the table and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you let me?" She'd stared at him for what felt like hours, and then she'd stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out without a single word. He'd sat there for 20 minutes, waiting for her to come back. She never did. Cal ran his thumb across the rusted lid of the box. 10 years of silence. 10 years of replaying that moment, trying to find the thing he'd said wrong, the sign he'd missed, the flaw in himself that had made her run. And now this, a box hidden in a wall, his name in her handwriting, a secret she'd kept in the bones of the building she'd never really left. He opened it. Inside, 3 objects sat nestled in faded tissue paper. The first was a strip of photos, the kind you got from those old booths at carnivals and shopping malls. 4 frames for moments, Cal making a face, Elena laughing, both of them pressed together with their cheeks touching, and the last one, a kiss, her hand on his jaw, his eyes closed. He remembered that booth. State Fair, 2014. She dragged him in, fed quarters into the machine, told him to stop being so serious for once. He'd kept his copies in a drawer for years before finally throwing them away during a move he couldn't remember. She'd kept hers in a box in a wall. The second object was a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. Cal opened it carefully, afraid it might crumble in his hands. It was a blueprint, hand-drawn, amateur but precise, the kind of thing you'd sketch on a napkin and then transfer to proper paper because you wanted it to last. A floor plan of a small addition, a sunroom with big windows and space for plants, and a chair positioned to catch the morning light. In the corner, a label in her handwriting. Sunroom if he says yes. Cal's throat closed. She'd drawn this before the proposal. Before she knew what his question would be. She'd imagined a future with him, had committed it to paper, had made it real enough to hide, and then she'd walked away from it anyway. Why? The third object was an envelope, sealed, yellowed at the edges. His name on the front, nothing else. He held it for a long time. The paper was soft from age, the glue brittle. It would open easily. One small tear, and he'd have his answer, or at least her version of it. But something stopped him. This wasn't just his secret. It was hers too. And if there was one thing Cal had learned in 62 years, it was that some doors shouldn't be opened alone. He put everything back in the box, closed the lid, and drove home through empty streets. He found her at the hospice the next morning, earlier than he expected. She was in the conference room, surrounded by paperwork, a cup of coffee growing cold at her elbow. She looked like she hadn't slept. "We need to talk." Elena looked up. Whatever she saw in his face made her set down her pen. "Close the door," she said. He did. Then he set the box on the table between them. Her breath caught. "You found it. Danny found it. Yesterday, behind the baseboard in the East Wing storage room." Cal sat down across from her. "I opened it last night. Everything except the letter." Elena's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the table, steadying herself. "I put it there in 2015. She said quietly, a week after I left the restaurant. I couldn't keep it in my apartment, couldn't throw it away. So I hid it in the one place I knew would outlast both of us." Her eyes went to the box. "I told myself that if life got lonely enough, I'd come back and open it, read my own words, remember why I made the choice I made. Did you come back? Twice." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Both times, I stood in that storage room with my hand on the baseboard and couldn't make myself pull it out. It was easier to leave it buried, easier to pretend the choice was still ahead of me instead of behind." Cal pushed the box toward her. "Then let's open it together." Now, she stared at him. "Cal, I've spent 10 years trying to figure out what I did wrong. What I said, what I missed, what part of me wasn't enough." He held her gaze. "You owe me an answer, Elena. Not an excuse. Not a summary. The actual words you wrote that night, when everything was still raw enough to be true." Elena's eyes were bright. She reached for the box with hands that shook, lifted the lid, and pulled out the envelope. "I was going to mail it," she said. "That was the plan. Write everything down. Send it to you. Let the paper say what I couldn't say out loud." She turned the envelope over in her hands. "But I couldn't do that either. Couldn't give you the burden of my reasons. So I hid it instead, and I told myself that someday, if you ever needed to know, the universe would find a way to put it in your hands. The universe didn't find it. A plumber did." A laugh escaped her, watery, broken. "Close enough." She slid her finger under the flap. The old glue gave way with a soft tearing sound. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, covered in handwriting that was messier than Cal had ever seen from her. Words crossed out, sentences that started and stopped. The raw, unedited architecture of a heart trying to explain itself. Elena unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the page, and Cal watched her face change. Pain, recognition, something that looked almost like grief. "Read it," he said, "out loud." She took a breath, and she began. "Cal, I'm writing this because I can't say it. Because if I try to say it, I'll see your face and I'll lose my nerve and I'll say yes just to make the hurt go away. And you deserve better than a yes that's really a surrender. You asked me to spend the rest of my life with you. And God, I wanted to. I've wanted that since the night you fixed my porch light and stayed for dinner and talked to me like I was the most interesting person you'd ever met. You looked at me like I was worth something, Cal, like I was more than the sum of my mistakes. But here's the thing I couldn't tell you. I'm not more than my mistakes. I'm made of them. Every choice I've ever made has been about running. From my family, from my past, from the parts of myself I don't know how to fix. And if I marry you, I'll spend the rest of my life waiting for you to see it. Waiting for the day you realize that loving me is a job, not a joy. You fix things, Cal. It's who you are. You see something broken, and you can't rest until it works again. And I'm terrified that's what I am to you. A project, a problem, something to be solved instead of someone to be loved. I said no, because I didn't want to become your burden. Because I've seen what happens when love turns into obligation. My parents, my sister, a dozen patients in that hospice who stayed together out of duty instead of devotion. I didn't want that for you, for us. But I was wrong. I was wrong, and I didn't know it until I walked out of that restaurant and realized I'd just made the same mistake I was trying to protect you from. I ran. I chose fear over faith. I left you sitting there with a ring and a question and no answer because I was too scared to trust that you meant it when you said you wanted me, all of me, broken parts included. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Cal. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to give it to you. But I needed to write it down. Needed to put the truth somewhere, even if it stays hidden forever. You were never a job. You were never a burden. You were the first person who made me feel like I could stop running. And I ran anyway. I'm sorry. Elena. The room was silent. Cal sat motionless, the words settling into him like stones dropped into still water. 10 years. 10 years of questions. And the answer had been waiting in a wall, written in her messiest handwriting, sealed away because she was too afraid to let him see it. Elena set the letter down. Tears were running down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I said no, she whispered, because I thought loving me would become your job. Cal looked at her, at the woman who'd broken his heart and hidden the explanation in a box labeled with his name, who'd carried her reasons like a wound for a decade, who was sitting across from him now with nothing left to hide behind. You were wrong, he said. I know. Loving you was never a job. Elena. It was the easiest thing I ever did. His voice cracked, and losing you was the hardest. She reached across the table. Her hand found his tentative trembling warm. I know, she said again. I know. They sat there in the conference room, hands intertwined, the letter between them, and for the first time in 10 years, the silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door. Thursday morning arrived like a hell breath. Cal had been at the hospice since 5 a.m., running final checks on every outlet, every junction box, every inch of wire he'd touched in the past 72 hours. Danny and Maria worked beside him in focused silence, tightening connections, testing circuits, making sure nothing had been missed. At 8:47 a.m., The state inspector walked through the front door. She was a small woman with gray hair and reading glasses, carrying a clipboard that looked like it had seen 1,000 buildings pass or fail. She didn't smile. She didn't make small talk. She just nodded at Elena and said, "Let's begin." Cal stayed out of the way. This was Elena's show now. Her building, her license, her future. He watched from the hallway as she led the inspector through the East Wing, answering questions in a calm, steady voice, pointing out the new wiring, the replaced panels, the updated safety features. The inspection took 2 hours. At 10:52 a.m., the inspector made a note on her clipboard, looked up at Elena, and said, "You pass. Provisional certification, pending a follow-up in 6 months. But you're clear to continue operations." Elena's knees buckled, just for a moment, a fraction of a second, before she caught herself and extended her hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much." The inspector shook her hand, nodded once, and walked out into the parking lot where her sedan was waiting. Cal watched her go, then turned to find Elena leaning against the wall, eyes closed, breathing like she'd just finished a marathon. "You did it," he said. "We did it." She opened her eyes. They were red-rimmed, exhausted, alive. "I couldn't have done this without you, Cal. Any of it. You would have found a way. Maybe." She pushed off the wall. "But I'm glad I didn't have to." The open house started at noon. Volunteers had transformed the lobby into something welcoming. Fresh flowers on every surface, a table of refreshments against the far wall, soft music playing from speakers someone had set up that morning. Families of current patients mingled with donors and board members, everyone dressed in their careful best, everyone pretending this was a celebration and not a last-ditch effort to keep the doors open. Harold Metzger arrived at 12:15. He was older than Cal expected, thin and stooped, with white hair combed carefully across a spotted scalp. He walked with a cane, each step deliberate, and his eyes swept the room with the sharp attention of a man who'd spent 86 years learning how to read people. Elena met him at the door. "Mr. Metzger, thank you so much for coming. Wouldn't miss it." His voice was stronger than his body suggested. "This place meant something to my wife before she passed. Means something to me now." His gaze found Cal across the room. "That him? Frank's boy?" "Yes, sir." Harold nodded slowly. "Bring him over. I want to shake his hand." Cal crossed the lobby, suddenly aware of his work boots and calloused palms and the sawdust that was probably still clinging to his collar. He stopped in front of the old man and extended his hand. "Mr. Metzger, Cal Bennett." Harold's grip was surprisingly firm. "You look like your father. Same jaw, same eyes." He didn't let go. Frank Bennett was one of the good ones. Showed up when he said he would. Did the work without complaining. Never asked for anything in return. He believed in this place. He believed in doing right by people. Harold released Cal's hand, but held his gaze. "You the same kind of man?" Cal thought about the last 72 hours. The burst pipe, the ruined files, the box hidden in a wall, the letter that had broken him open and put him back together in the same breath. I'm trying to be, he said. Harold studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, a small, satisfied expression that transformed his weathered face. Good enough for me. He turned to Elena. Double the pledge. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers next week. Elena's composure cracked. Mr. Metzger, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep this place running. He patted her arm with a gnarled hand. And invite me to the wedding. He shuffled off toward the refreshment table before either of them could respond. Cal and Elena stood frozen, the word hanging between them like a live wire. Wedding? He doesn't know, Elena said quickly. I never told him about. He just assumed. I know. He's old-fashioned. He sees a man and a woman working together, and he thinks, Elena! She stopped. Her face was flushed, her hands twisting together in front of her. Cal reached into his pocket, not the ring, that was still in his wallet, still pressing its shape into leather that had molded around it years ago. Instead, he pulled out the letter. Her letter, the one she'd written 10 years ago and hidden in a wall. I read this 6 times last night. He said, memorized most of it. And there's one line I can't stop thinking about. Elena's breath caught. Which one? You were the first person who made me feel like I could stop running. Cal held the letter between them. Did you mean that? When you wrote it? Yes. Do you still mean it now? The lobby buzzed around them. Conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses, and the shuffle of feet. But in the space between Cal and Elena, everything had gone quiet. I never stopped meaning it, she whispered. I just stopped believing I deserved it. Cal folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. Then he reached for her hand, not hesitantly this time, not carefully, but with the certainty of a man who'd finally stopped being afraid of the answer. I'm not going to propose again, he said. Not today. Not with a ring and a question and all the pressure of getting it right. Elena's face flickered. Confusion, disappointment, something she was trying to hide. But I am going to ask you something, Cal continued. Something smaller. Something we can actually say yes to. What? Have dinner with me. Tonight. After all of this is over, and the donors have gone home, and we've both had a chance to breathe. He squeezed her hand. Not a redo, not a second chance at the same old story. Just a next, a first step toward whatever comes after. Elena looked at him, at the man who'd shown up when she called, who'd worked through the night to save a building he had no reason to care about, who'd opened a box with his name on it and read her worst fears without flinching. Okay, she said. Okay. Yes. A smile broke across her face, the first real smile he'd seen from her in 10 years. Yes, Cal, I'll have dinner with you. He smiled back, and for a moment, standing in the middle of a crowded lobby with an 86-year-old donor watching them from across the room, everything else fell away. The open house ended at 4. Cal helped the volunteers break down tables and sweep floors, moving through the familiar rhythm of cleanup, while Elena said goodbye to the last of the guests. Whitmore, the donor rep, had left an hour earlier, satisfied apparently with what he'd seen. He'd even shaken Cal's hand on the way out. By 5 o'clock, the hospice was quiet again. The families had returned to their rooms, the staff had settled into evening routines, and the building felt less like a crisis zone and more like what it was supposed to be, a place where people came to say goodbye. Cal found Elena in the garden. It was a small space behind the east wing, a patch of grass surrounded by flower beds, with a few benches arranged around a bird bath that had seen better days. The sun was low, painting everything gold and amber, and Elena sat on one of the benches with her face turned toward the light. He sat down beside her. 12 families, she said quietly. 12 people who get to stay here because we didn't give up. You didn't give up. I just showed up with a toolbox. You showed up. She turned to look at him. That's the part that mattered. They sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. Somewhere inside, a nurse was laughing at something. The sound drifted through an open window like music. I've been thinking about the sunroom, Cal said finally. Elena blinked. The sunroom. The one you drew. In the blueprint. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket. He'd been carrying it since last night, unable to leave it behind. Big windows. Space for plants. A chair for the morning light. That was a fantasy. Something I imagined before. I know what it was. Cal unfolded the paper and smoothed it across his knee. But I've been looking at it, and the dimensions are good. The orientation would work for southern exposure. You'd get sun most of the day, even in winter. He traced the lines with his finger. If you still wanted it, I could build it. Not on my apartment. I sold that place years ago. But somewhere, whenever you're ready. Elena stared at the blueprint, at the careful lines she'd drawn 10 years ago, imagining a future she'd been too afraid to choose. You kept this, she said. You kept everything. I'm just catching up. She laughed, a wet, broken sound that was half sob. We're ridiculous. Both of us. 10 years of silence because we were too scared to say what we meant. Probably. Cal refolded the blueprint and put it away. But we're not silent anymore. He stood up and offered her his hand. Come on. I know a diner that does a decent meatloaf, and I owe you a meal that isn't cold eggs eaten over paperwork. Elena took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, and for a moment they stood there in the fading light, two people who'd spent a decade learning how to live with loss, finally choosing to reach for something else. Cal, yeah, I'm glad you answered the call. He smiled. So, am I? They walked back through the garden, past the flower beds and the bird bath, toward the parking lot where his truck was waiting. Behind them, the hospice glowed warm against the evening sky. A building full of endings, but also somehow full of beginnings. 6 months later, there was a bench. It sat in the corner of the garden, positioned to catch the morning sun, built from reclaimed wood that Cal had salvaged from a barn in the county. Elena had helped him sand it, both of them working in comfortable silence, sawdust in their hair and something like peace in their chests. The brass plate was small, simple, the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't looking for it. But the words were enough for the days we still get. And every morning before the hospice woke up and the work began, two people sat there together, not talking, not planning, just watching the light change and feeling, for the first time in a long time, like they'd finally stopped running, like they'd finally come home,